certainly look forward to the opportunity to provide you with a lot of information here, and as well as answer your questions. And so again, know that it's a nice day outside, and we want to respect your time and move through this with pretty good speed. And so with that said, I will turn the meeting over to Jordan Dukes.
Well, thanks everyone, and good afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. I'm going to run through issues fairly quickly, and how we're going to run through it is I'll run through some topics and then open it up for questions from the group. And right after I'm done is your lone chance to ask me questions on the federal stuff. So if it's on any of these or anything else, let me know and I can do my best to answer them. I wanted to hit on a couple of kind of the top tier working issues that I've focused on, and then we can go through some questions. Obviously, near the top of our pile is the drafting of the new Farm Bill, and certainly from our perspective, and where the legislative calendar looks, this is going to be a topic that's going to come really hot and heavy very quickly. So we have an expiration date of the 2014 Farm Bill at the end of September, and we are working through this process to try to get a Farm Bill done on time. For the last bill was certainly not done on time. We had a couple extensions and certainly struggled to get one through. And while for a time it seemed that was going to be the mode that we would be operating under for this one, I don't necessarily think we're looking at that right now. I think you have a Congress that is ready to get one done on time. President Trump indicated at the American Farm Bureau annual meeting that he wanted to get one done on time. And, you know, depending upon how some of the more politically touchy issues look here in the weeks ahead, I think we have a very good opportunity to get something done and get something done on time. Now, the number one issue, as it is with a lot of things, is money. And certainly from our perspective, we want to make sure that while we have some budgetary limitations, we are at the same time still providing a safety net that works for farmers and ranchers. We are still going to try to work within the budget parameters that are given to us, but we still want to make sure that a safety net exists that is workable for you all, and one that provides protection at inopportune or rough economic times, which is certainly something we're experiencing today. If you look at what was passed at the end of last week, the budget deal, that's taken two of the largest, if not the largest, topics of conversation off the table. That is a expansion of the cotton program and some changes to the dairy program. Those have been the industries that have, I think, struggled with their Farm Bill programs the most. And with the provisions that were included in the budget deal, it took those issues off the table, which I think in a lot of ways greases the skids and allows us to get a Farm Bill done in a much more fast fashion than what we had done before. So in terms of our priorities, and you can see it's pretty clear where our priorities are at in terms of where we think this Farm Bill needs to go. Is it's crop insurance, crop insurance, crop insurance, and then we have the other stuff that we'll get to. If you look at the president's budget that he released just the beginning of this week, crop insurance is again under attack. And quite frankly, it's the same stuff that we've seen. I think we will see an assault on crop insurance again as we get into this Farm Bill. I think we feel very strongly that we have a good chance to keep the program as it is, but that won't last forever. And we will see a number of amendments trying to change crop insurance, whether it be putting means testing in on crop insurance. If your income is so high, your subsidization is limited or completely eliminated. Also, caps on the amount of subsidization you get for your crop insurance policies. Either a numeric number, you only receive this much total dollars in the way of subsidization of crop insurance, or there would be a limitation as to the percentage, a reduction of the percentage covered by the federal government. So there's talk about all that. And from our perspective, it's pretty simple. And we can get into the issues and we can get into what things, you know, some minor changes we can make to the crop insurance program, but what we are trying to send a message, or the message we're trying to send to Capitol Hill, is very flatly that crop insurance is by far the most important safety net program to Nebraska farmers and ranchers. It is arguably one of, if not the most popular crop insurance or farm safety net program that has ever been devised in the history of farm programs. And so why mess with it? It is a very small portion of the federal budget. It is nothing in terms of the federal budget, the total cost of it. For the first time, we are above, crop insurance does sit above other commodity programs in terms of cost, but it is a program that requires farmers to have skin in the game. It is a program that is mandated by lenders, and so it is going to be very difficult for us to see any farm bill that we would support that has crop insurance changes to it. We'll obviously have to cross that bridge when we get there. We'll need to see what it looks like, but we're going to fight very hard to keep the crop insurance program where it is today. Also of note, I think on that part of the conversation is that, you know, it's the groups that go after crop insurance aren't just the typical groups that we think they would be. It's not just environmental groups. It is far-right conservative groups who have a very real problem with crop insurance, and so we definitely have a broad coalition that we have to deal with on that. But the protection of the crop insurance program is going to be item number one. And the reason being is that when you start making tweaks, as we've talked about, is that it affects everyone else downstream. Mississippi State University conducted a study. Actually, they just released the final draft here a couple weeks ago, and it shows that while they have no real reason for why this is, we could probably point to a couple things, but larger farms tend to be less risky. And when you pull those folks out of the crop insurance pool, crop insurance costs go up for everybody. And so when you start putting AGI limits in crop insurance, when you start reducing subsidies for larger producers, the incentive for them to remain in the program is diminished. And so what we are going to make sure we do is protect the program as best we can. Now, we are talking about other things. And when we talk about the rest of the stuff, we're talking about some minor changes to the Ark County program. The PLC program will likely remain as is. Because of the money situation we're in, don't expect a big revolutionary farm bill with 6 new programs and different things to learn. Everything that I keep hearing from Capitol Hill and our contacts there is that the programs that we have are going to be the programs we will have. We're just probably going to see some changes to them, whether they be a minor increase in the acres covered, the percentage of acres covered under the Ark County program, possibly an increase in the price under the Ark County program. We'll have to see what that means and what that looks like. Again, money is the main factor there. The PLC program will likely remain as is. We're not going to see an increase in the target price program. I know that's a lot of talk. If you look at projections as to where PLC payments will be, given where farm program payments are at today, you're probably not going to see a massive payment on the PLC program. However, if things remain as they are, we have these same programs, they stay where they're at, it's probably going to be more conducive for farmers in Nebraska to choose the PLC program over the Ark County program in terms of offering coverage and protection given where we're at on the farm economic side. So we'll have to see what that looks like, and we'll certainly keep you all updated as best we can throughout this process. But that's where we'll be at Title I. At Title II, or the conservation title, I should say, because I don't know if that is Title II. It could be Title III. I can't remember. It all gets confusing. The conservation, we're looking to keep CRP where we're at in terms of acres. That's probably one of our major initiatives. We are trying to maybe look at CRP, some changes to the CRP program, especially when it comes to pollinators, the amount of money that producers can get with CRP, and throw in a pollinator part in there and the amount of money that comes there. We had a prioritization of working lands programs over retirement programs. So the EQIP program, the CSP program, we deem those as more important than the CRP program, and we'll certainly get into that. We get a lot of questions on food stamps and where that'll be. If you look at where we've saved money, this farm bill, this 2014 farm bill has saved money, a substantial amount of money, versus where we thought it would be when we projected the payouts when we first drafted it. And almost all of those savings come in the food stamp program. We've actually spent a lot more money than we projected to in the farm program side of things. So I would say that while that is where the big pool of money is, and we continue to educate folks as to that's where the big pool of money is, the number of folks that have been enrolled in food stamps has dropped off, and so we've seen a savings there on that side of things. So there is that there. That's probably it on the farm bill side of things, and we'll certainly answer questions as folks have them as we move forward here. But certainly, really near the top of our to-do list in terms of Congress's actions this year. I want to provide a little bit of a regulatory update on a couple things, and certainly I can't get away without talking about WOTUS. We are working through this process, and if you want to see and really highlight how difficult it is to get rid of a federal regulation, the WOTUS rule is a good case study in that. We've had an executive order signed by the president early on to begin the process to eliminate WOTUS. We had the secretary or the administrator of EPA beginning that process and finalizing a rule that would delay implementation. And we are in the process of drafting a new rule to replace the 2015 rule that we had such a problem with. And we are also pursuing legal options to prevent the environmental organizations and others from challenging the delay of implementation of the 2015 rule. All these things work together. We have a multi-level strategy here to try to make sure that, number one, we rewrite a new WOTUS rule that makes sense. And you wouldn't think that it'd be that hard to write a rule that says the government can regulate water bodies that are actually, water bodies or have water in them, but it's a lot harder than you think it is. And so we're in the middle of that process. This is kind of the important part, probably the most important part. Getting rid of the rule is one thing, but writing a new rule that respects common sense, commonly held visions and understanding of what bodies of water the federal government has historically been able to regulate, that's going to be a large focus for us, and certainly something we're engaged in that topic at American Farm Bureau as well. But then also from the legal standpoint, especially on the American Farm Bureau level, making sure that we don't on the back end have an EPA that is forced to implement a rule from 2015 that it has no desire to, and that we worked very hard to get rid of. And speaking of that, it kind of brings us to our next one, and that is the CERCLA rule. Basically, this is a rule that in 2008, the EPA finalized a rule that was attached to a piece of legislation that was looking at hazardous waste sites, Superfund sites reporting hazardous air emissions, hazardous gas emissions into the atmosphere. Livestock producers were never as a part of that, and they were never included in that. That was outside of the will of Congress as to what should be included in this regulation, and EPA was with us on this. Even the Obama EPA administration said livestock producers shouldn't have to comply with this, and a number of environmental and animal rights activists sued the EPA, and at the beginning or toward the beginning of 2017, the courts ruled that livestock producers were not exempt and that they would need to comply with this. We've been working through the court side of things, waiting for the court to tell us when the exact date is for regulation. That is now May 1st. We have a delay for that long until producers need to come up with it. In the meantime, though, we've been working very hard with Congress to try to make sure that they can pass a bill that just exempts livestock from it. For livestock producers, you need to report emission releases of ammonia and sodium nitrate, and it is extraordinarily difficult to calculate how much in the way livestock producers emit of these gases. And EPA, if you were to call up EPA today, they couldn't tell you how many head it takes to hit those levels, a reportable level where you would come into needing to be in compliance with this. They can't tell you that, and quite frankly, we can't tell you that. It is that hard to calculate these things. The calculators that EPA has up on their website have never been tested in court, and so there are some very real legal problems with this rule generally in terms of having producers comply with them. And so that is why we've been working with Congress to get livestock producers just simply exempt from it. And that's where we're at today. Senator Fisher, 2 days ago, introduced a piece of legislation to exempt livestock producers from the circular regulation. That bill has, I think, 8 to 12, I need to look at the latest number, 8 to 12 Democrat co-sponsors. We're looking at a situation where we may actually have a standalone bill pass the United States Senate in the very near future. And if you pay attention at all to the news as to what's happening with Congress, it is very rare that we have just a standalone piece of legislation that does one minor thing pass the United States Congress, and we're looking that we may actually have that possibility. So we are working with Congress on that. We thank Senator Fisher for her leadership on that and working to get bipartisan co-sponsors on that, so where we can actually get this thing moving. I've been hearing that a markup of the bill is in relatively short order, so they're going to try to bring it up in the next few weeks, and we're going to mark this thing up and hopefully get it passed well before the May 1st deadline, so EPA doesn't have to work with this. Again, this is an area where we've been working closely with the EPA. They've been relatively helpful, and they've just been forced to do this by court order. So we are certainly supportive of this effort, and certainly support Senator Fisher's bill and appreciate her activities there to do that. Speaking of Senator Fisher, all these are kind of connected here. President Nelson and I, as well as a member from Jefferson, their Gage County, Shane Meyer, and myself traveled to Washington this week to sit down with the Department of Transportation to talk about the hours of service issues that have arisen because of the new electronic logbook mandate, the ELD mandate. And there's a long history with this, and I'm not going to go through all that, but what I will say is that the ELD issue, while certainly we brought up some concerns as to how this is implemented for livestock haulers, probably the bigger issue as to where we're at on the livestock side of things, what the ELD does is simply enforce hours of service regulations, and for a long time we've had some concerns of the hours of service regs, and I think these are being highlighted more so today than what they've had in the past. And so we had the opportunity to sit down and talk with the Department of Transportation, had a good conversation with them. I will tell you that we have a March 18th deadline for this to move forward for those who are required to have an ELD, which there are certain limitations for that. If you are just a farmer hauling your own product within the state in which your vehicle is licensed, or within 150 air miles of your beginning point, or if you don't go outside of that 150 air mile radius more than 8 times, or more than 8 times within a month, you are exempt from these regulations. You don't have to have an ELD. You don't have to have a CDL. If you remember, MAP 21 did some good things for us as well. So what? Yeah, covered farm vehicles. If you're doing your own stuff, you're certainly fine for the most part. The problem that we're hearing that we're running into is with livestock haulers who have live animals on the back of their semi, who have to get those animals to an endpoint, to a destination. And the stories we hear are folks who are trying to follow the regulations but fall within maybe an hour away from home, and they've got to shut the truck off and shut down for 10 hours to allow their hours of service to restart and get their rest period. So what we're looking to do is find some way to provide flexibility in this. We're not trying to talk to the Department of Transportation and tell them that all truckers, livestock haulers, everybody needs to be able to drive on the road for 72 hours. We're not saying that at all. Safety is a big component here. But what we are asking for is limited flexibility to where you have run-ins with situations where a guy is a couple of hours away from home, is within 150 to 300 miles from home or destination and needs to get there with live animals. Given the environmental and animal rights concerns that we are under, it is important to get those animals off the truck and get them to their destination. And so we are working with the Department of Transportation on possibly an administrative solution with that. We're looking at the possibilities of a legislative solution to this as well. And we're continuing to have those conversations. But we appreciated the opportunity of Senator Fisher to have the meeting with the Department of Transportation to highlight some of the concerns that folks have had. Shane is a livestock, is a hog producer, and has had some issues with this. And certainly the hog industry and the cattle industry as well has had some issues here. So we're certainly paying attention to those issues as well. The last thing I want to hit on is talking about trade. And we're just going to provide some really quick updates on these. The administration is currently going through NAFTA renegotiation, and we are monitoring that process and making sure that livestock and the crop producers, the agricultural industry as a whole, is not harmed in these renegotiations. And pulling out of NAFTA, folks, will absolutely harm the livestock and crop industries in this state and across the country. And so we are making sure the administration is moving through some renegotiation processes that they'd like to. The auto industry is the main focus here, not the agriculture industry nearly as much. And so what we are hoping for is a do no harm process with livestock and crop producers. So we'll see. We continue to monitor there. I think the president they've made some efforts there, made some positive moves there, and we'll continue to monitor that. South Korea is also being renegotiated. Not as big of a free trade agreement for Nebraska, but certainly an important one as well. And you'll be seeing some things from us in the not too distant future highlighting how important the South Korean free trade agreement is for Nebraska, how important chorus is, and we'll do that. But certainly, especially for pork and cattle producers, it's very much important, and we're monitoring that as well. We continue to have ongoing issues with China. We have had some concerns with them not following through with the quotas that they've had in terms of importing. So we've been monitoring that as well. And so we're working through that. The president put some tariffs on some Chinese products coming into the United States, washing machines and solar panels. And that certainly causes some concern there because of what the retaliatory efforts Chinese may take. And they've already taken some on some ag products. And so we're monitoring that situation as well. And last, I just wanted to bring up, we continue to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership simply because the other countries that are involved in that agreement are moving forward without the United States. The president indicated that some willingness to re-enter that negotiation if some substantial changes are made. We're working with the administration to see what some of those changes may be, and certainly think that we need to have a conversation about this further and find some ways we can maybe find a way to get the United States back in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So that's it for me on the federal side. Any questions for me? I went through those extremely quickly, but any questions folks may have?
And to ask a question, there are a couple ways you can do that. You can either click on the little icon that looks like a hand, you raise your hand up, I can unmute your microphone, or you can also type a question in the question box. So if there's any questions, we can get those asked to Jordan. I'm not seeing any at this point, so.
Okay, well, we can come back at the end, and if you have any questions related to national issues, we could address those at that time as well. So I would now turn it over to Ansley, who is going to begin covering state issues. Go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. So under the state issues,
Yeah,
I don't know.
There we go.
So this could have gone easily on the first slide too. We just wanted to highlight, I think we started with this last year. We highlighted a little bit of coverage on the trade and tax front here. If you're looking at this on your computer, those links are live, so you can click them and move forward. We can start here with property taxes. As everyone might be familiar at this point, LB 829 is Senator Erdman's bill, which basically mirrors the ballot initiative proposal being floated. This bill provides a refundable income tax credit equal to about 50% of the property taxes you pay to K through 12 schools. The property taxes you pay to K through 12 schools are approximately 60% of your overall bill. So our, kind of rough math means this bill or the ballot initiative would provide about a 30% reduction in your overall tax liability. And that bill's in the Revenue Committee. It's been heard. There's a great turnout. A lot of folks came in to talk about what kind of, obviously, what impacts the bill would have, but also what kind of a burden the property taxes are. Moving on, LB 947 is the bill introduced by Senator Jim Smith from Papillion on behalf of the governor. It's also in the Revenue Committee, and it's been heard. The bill would do a number of things, including providing some property tax relief by repurposing the dollars in the property tax credit fund into a refundable income tax credit and building that credit over time. So unlike the original, the underlying bill, which starts at a 10% refundable income tax credit, in his opening statements, in both their opening statements, the governor and Senator Smith both stated they're going to start at 12% for agriculture and residential property. And you'll see kind of down there where the commercial side of the property tax credit fund goes. But for ag and residential, the refundable income tax credit would start at 12%, and it builds up. We've discussed getting to a 30% refundable income tax credit in a reasonable amount of time, similar to what Senator Erdman has proposed and what's on the ballot, just in a little bit more of a phased-in approach. And again, you won't see that if you look at LB 947 as written, you won't see that reflected. There has not been an amendment proposed yet, but that is what was discussed, and that was what was presented in the opening comments at the hearing. The bill also provides some income tax relief, and you'll see there that the cost of those income tax relief would be covered by the commercial industrial portion of the current property tax credit fund. There's also some workforce development dollars that we believe would come out of the cash reserve. And you'll see there that Farm Bureau testified in support of the bill as amended. LB 1084 is Senator Breezy's bill, also in the Revenue Committee. This was the package put forward by Nebraskans United, of which Nebraska Farm Bureau was a part. Actually, I think it's safe to say Farm Bureau was a leader. I think Bruce helped and is helping keep that group together. This proposal would generate, according to the fiscal note, it generates $435 million. There is still some discussion about whether or not that is, that number is a little lowballed by the fiscal office, and there's still some discussion happening around that. But as it stands now, it's $435 million, and those dollars are used to reinstate the allocated income tax, which is under the TIOSA formula, the state aid formula. The allocated income tax was a part of that formula originally. It's just kind of been whittled away over the years. And what that does is it sends 20% of the income taxes generated in a school district back to that district. And those income taxes are considered a resource under the formula. So in larger districts where you have a higher portion of income taxes generated, you might actually see some equalization dollars go down, freeing up some state aid money for those districts that might not be as wealthy. The bill also restores some cuts from last year. This would benefit mostly currently equalized districts. It also injects dollars into the property tax credit fund. You'll see up there more than $300 million at this point, at least based on the calculations we've made. And like we said, it could be more. That's a negotiation with the fiscal office currently. The bill also includes a soft property tax asking cap on K-12 schools, and it would require the Nebraska Department of Education to undergo a study of the current funding formula, which all things Farm Bureau likes. We testified in support. Obviously, we were a part of writing that bill. And then moving on to Senator Friesen's LB 1103, that bill is actually in the Education Committee, and it would provide 25% state aid for each student's basic funding calculated in the state aid formula, or TIOSA. That's what that acronym stands for each school district per fiscal year. So this bill starts out at a 25% foundation aid formula, and Senator Friesen would like to build that up over time, although that's not built into the bill currently. The bill also doesn't include funding at this time. That's something we'll have to figure out. That's certainly the intent is for it to be paid for. It would cost about $193 million at this point to implement LB 1103 at the 25% level. And we think, given that that's 25% of the district's need, needs and not just a per pupil foundation aid, which is what you see in a lot of places. This actually will help rural and unequalized schools quite a lot. So we obviously testified in support of that bill. You'll see there is final approval and an official launch dated for February 14th. I am sure none of you have seen a lot on the ballot initiative this week, even though that date was originally considered for an official launch. It's our understanding that the ballot language is at the Secretary of State's office. So you would have noticed, I mentioned everybody, and this might be kind of interesting, it might be a little bit too technical, but just so everyone knows, when Senator Erdman introduced LB 829, which is the legislation that sort of mirrors the ballot initiative, the fiscal office came back with an interesting analysis of the language, and the fiscal note was a lot lower than what was the intent of the language. You know, the intent was we make sure we reimburse folks for half of what they're paying to K through 12 schools. Because of a quirk in the language, they didn't think that would be interpreted correctly. So we had to restart the ballot initiative process. When I say we, I mean Reform for Nebraska's Future, or Yes to Property Tax Relief. They had to kind of restart that process, and now they're a little at the whim of state government. They have to wait for the right people to be in the office at the right time, and they have a week to turn that back around. So that got pushed back just a little bit, but we're confident at this point when it does get out, and that should be just in the next few days, it's going to be right. So that's a relief for us. You'll also see up there, I know a lot of folks are asking, you know, how can we be helpful on the ballot front? And these are kind of the things we received from Yes to Property Tax Relief. They're going to need volunteers, they'll need field offices, and they'll need signature locations. You'll notice circulators and notaries are a very big issue. Both of those things really reduce the cost of gathering signatures. They're also looking obviously for signature locations and field offices. So yeah, if you have any ideas, or you know folks who own the grocery stores, or you yourself are a retailer in town, they certainly like that. We're also looking for community events, you know, where it might make sense to send circulators. It might make sense to have some of the folks who are leading this effort go speak, explain to people what we're doing. You'll also notice at the bottom of the screen, Bruce and President Nelson will be in Broken Bow and Stapleton on Monday talking about all of these issues. I think it's really important to keep in mind, we are Farm Bureau, obviously, if you've seen the headlines, we are 100% in on the ballot initiative. That doesn't change the fact that we are also 100% committed to getting this done legislatively. I think everyone appreciates how much a ballot initiative will cost. Right now, we're really focused on getting the signatures. I think the signatures are important either way. You know, you don't have to move forward with an entire campaign, assuming if the legislature was to act and to provide enough property tax relief to meet agriculture's requests, or to sort of meet our expectations. You don't have to follow through with the full campaign, but getting 100,000 signatures across Nebraska that says, you know, we want, there are enough people watching and they want property tax relief and they don't want to get in this situation again, I think is very effective in terms of not just getting something done this year, but holding our elected officials accountable moving forward, so they know that we really are capable of doing this if we have to again. So here we just kind of moved in, aside from the property taxes, I'll move through this stuff pretty quickly. You know, property taxes are obviously the #1 issue, but they're not the only issue we have in front of the legislature. LB 1000, which is Senator Breezy's bill in the Government Committee, it actually provides that joint bonds issued under the Public Facilities Construction and Finance Act must be subject to a vote of the people. This was a bill we helped Senator Breezy bring forward. Last year, we discovered that a school, one school district and an ESU had partnered under this act. Originally, the act was intended to allow 2 tax levying entities to partner together on a joint project, and they could do a bond up to $5 million without a vote. Last year, from what we can tell, for the first time, a school and an ESU did a $5 million, partnered on a $5 million bond they're not doing a joint project. They're each using a portion of that bond for construction and updates at their own facilities. Not only do we think this is a bad precedent, and we don't want to see schools, any property tax levying entity, period, go forward with these bonds without a vote of the people. We also think they might have circumvented the original intent of the legislature, which was for truly joint projects. We don't like the precedent that sets, and you could really see, you know, if a bond issue fails in your school district, nothing is stopping them from calling up the ESU or calling up another tax levying entity and saying, hey, you know, we didn't get a bond passed. Do you need some construction? Do you need $1.5 million for your construction? Let's partner and go forward. On LB 1022 is in the Revenue Committee. That bill has garnered a lot of attention. So 1 cent per 10-gallon use tax on water on irrigated ag acres. You'll see from our little dot there that on a 1,000 gallon per minute well running 24 hours, the tax would equal $1,440 per day. Obviously, we'll be in the committee in full force testifying on that bill. I'm guessing it's something that the entire Ag Leaders Working Group will want to weigh in on, and we'll obviously have some information on that next week. That bill has not been heard yet. It's actually being heard in the Revenue Committee next Thursday. LB 758 is Senator Hughes' bill in the Natural Resources Committee. This is a kind of a compromise legislation to allow for NCORP and other augmentation projects in the future to remit payments in lieu of taxes, which would offset some of the property tax impacts on such augmentation projects. So for anyone not familiar with NCORP, it's a 19,000 acre project, primarily in and around Lincoln County. There are a couple of NRDs involved. A year or so ago, it came to the NRD's attention that they probably shouldn't be remitting property taxes. It's unconstitutional, actually, for a government entity to remit property taxes. So Turk basically ruled that they shouldn't be returning property taxes, which hurt at least one school district there and a lot of property owners, especially in Lincoln County. This is sort of a compromise way to ensure that those property taxes are offset. Farm Bureau supported that proposal. You'll see on LB 1123, Farm Bureau went in last week. Senator Groney has been very willing to look at ways of making 1123 a little more palatable to the water interests around the state. Farm Bureau and a lot of the ag groups expressed, and in fact, I think we ended up testifying on behalf of a couple of groups in the hearing, including, you know, the Cattlemen and Farmers Union, who don't want the water rights separated from the overlying land. They don't want the NRDs to sell, who have these augmentation projects, to sell the land back to private ownership but retain the water rights. And that's something right now Senator Groney is working on addressing. That would be kind of an unprecedented move in terms of water law in Nebraska, and we're really worried about unintended consequences. Move through these couple kind of quickly, but I want to make sure we leave time for questions. LB 907 is kind of an interesting bill. We helped draft as well, along with We Support Agriculture, clarifying the definition of ag machinery, especially as it relates to livestock equipment. So for a little bit of background, we had one ag machinery manufacturer in Gage County who was being audited by the Department of Revenue, who came to us and said, we've never paid sales tax on this equipment, and the Department of Revenue is trying to kind of change the rules of the game. So we went back and looked. The statute on the exemptions, the sales tax exemptions for agriculture, is very broad, but the regulatory interpretation from the Department of Revenue is actually pretty specific, and it actually says in their regulatory interpretation that anything for the care and raising of animal life is included in the sales tax exemption. It's also included, it's counted as an input. For them to come in and suggest that some of those things should be subject to sales tax, like I said, it's kind of changing the rules of the game. It's not a good precedent for us. Who knows how far they'll go. This probably isn't where they want to stop. And again, we're not asking for a new exemption. This is a current exemption we're trying to leave in place. There are a lot of really interesting questions surrounding this. I don't want to take up too much time on it, but if anyone has thoughts or questions, I'm happy to engage on that front. I think we're on the right side of that issue, and we made that pretty clear in committee. We just have to keep reminding folks that, you know, and most of the time in the regulatory process, if something has been a precedent for a long time and you're going to change it, you have to go through a rulemaking process, and you have to engage the public, and you have to engage the stakeholders. In this situation, that would be the case. They would just start taxing something they haven't previously, which again is not sustainable, and that's not good for ag and not good for business. LB 921 is Senator Lowe's bill, and it's in the General Affairs Committee. There's also a hearing on this. This is something that we Support Ag and Farm Bureau engaged in last fall. It's something we kind of tried to work out regulatorily. Both of these have been things we've tried to do regulatorily, provide a little bit of certainty for growers. Unfortunately, it couldn't happen. So once this bill was brought forward in the legislature, Farm Bureau, I think again we took what we thought was the right side of this issue, and there is a ratio mandate in our electrical code that requires one certified electrician or one journeyman for every 3 apprentice electricians. This is a ratio pretty specific, as far as we can tell, to Nebraska. For a little bit of background too, now that we have 500 chicken barns going up in northeast Nebraska, the fear is in less than a year. It's a lot of construction. It's going to require a great deal of labor, and not all of that labor has to be certified or has to be completely experienced. So what we're trying to do here is provide an exemption for agriculture from this labor requirement, or at least increase the ratio when it comes to stuff that has nothing to do with electrification or safety. So these barns, and this is specific to Lincoln Premium Poultry and Costco, but it's actually being brought forward by the Nebraska company that won the bid to put up these barns. There are a lot of Nebraska-based contractors who have experience doing these things and don't think they can find enough labor to fulfill this obligation. And it's something that probably somebody missed when they were doing the estimates of how much each of these barns would cost. That said, now that it's out there and now that we know it's a problem and it's going to be a problem in the future, I think it's important for us to be on the right side of this issue. Again, it's labor related, it's not safety related, and these barns will be inspected just like they were before. LB 1133 is in the Agriculture Committee. It's been heard. Becky Schwartz came in and testified for Farm Bureau to provide the Nebraska Department of Ag an opportunity to develop and commercialize industrial hemp. This is consistent. The bill was written consistent with the 2014 Farm Bill, which classified hemp differently. Just so hemp has a very low THC level. It's not comparable to marijuana, which I think the Ag Committee heard in the hearing a great deal. It's still at the federal level, we have to keep working to remove industrial hemp as a Schedule I narcotic. That's something that's a priority for the American Farm Bureau as well. It's a really good crop. It's low, it's low resource and not resource intensive at all. And there's some outlets for it at this point. So it's just something that passed at the annual meeting and something we weighed in on this year. And finally, just so everyone knows, this is something that we've been having conversations on the revenue with folks on the Revenue Committee with about the federal tax law change enacted last year, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Made some changes, obviously a lot of very positive changes for ag and individual taxpayers. And actually there are bills introduced in the state legislature to kind of harmonize the federal law with the state law, since Nebraska's state tax law mirrors so closely the federal law. There were a few things that were eliminated at the federal level that are actually going to increase pretty regressively taxes on some individuals. So there are some bills introduced to do this. then we discovered that because of some changes on the way on 1031 exchanges, instead of basing personal property taxes on the difference between your trade-in and your new piece of machinery, assuming the trade-in is fully depreciated, instead of basing it on that difference, which in this example would be $100,000, the new basis would be $400,000, which is the cost of the new equipment. And you'll see under this example that that's about a $5,000 personal property tax increase. We think, obviously, we can't abide by that, and since there are other efforts within the legislature to quote-unquote save taxpayers from some of the changes in the federal law, we've talked to a number of Revenue Committee members about doing the same thing for agriculture on the personal property tax front. Well, not just for ag, anyone with depreciable machinery.
Right.
So if, I think that, yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, I do have a question, and it goes back to the ballot initiative. And before I answer the question, I want to make sure that everybody does know if you have a question, you can type it in the question box. You can also click the little icon that looks like a hand. It'll raise your hand. I'll unmute your microphone. You can ask the question that way as well. Also want to point out that we do have our legislative bill summary that's available. You can download it directly from this webinar. There's a link over in your control panel that will say handouts. If you click on that, you'll see 2018 legislative bill review, and you can download that and have that. That will also be emailed out tomorrow in Newswire, and there will be multiple on our website as well. So you can certainly find that to get answers to many of the bills that we're watching and our positions on those. The first question that we have is going back to the ballot initiative, and you had a list of towns that were listed there, and the question is that the only place you can sign the ballot initiative? And the answer to that is no. That is just going to be kind of a collection point, from what I understand, to where if you're someone that's carrying the petitions around, that will be the place that you can go turn those petitions in. And they'll have multiple locations across the state. So not everybody will have to come to Lincoln or Omaha to turn those petitions in if you're circulating them out in Scotts Bluff or North Platte or Grand Island, making it closer for folks. So, okay, next question is, do we need people to appear for the hearing on 10/22 next Thursday?
And the answer is yes, but I'm going to ask you to appear at the hearing on Wednesday, the 21st. And that's okay, but yeah, it's Senator Shoemaker's LB 1022, which is the Irrigation Tax Act. Ansley already gave you the specifics on that, exactly what it would cost. What we hope to do, one is to make sure that bill dies. Two is we'd be happy to work with any of you that are interested in coming to Lincoln to testify at that hearing, to help paint the picture, the bigger picture for the Revenue Committee about what they can be doing with the various bills that are already in the hopper that have been heard in the committee. Ansley talked about those. That's LB 829, which is Senator Erdman's bill, 947, which is the governor's, 1084, Senator Breezy's, and 1103, which are Senator Friesen's. What we need to do as a grassroots organization and advocacy group is to make sure that we are painting the picture or drawing the roadmap as to how the various positive aspects of each of those bills could come together to deliver meaningful property tax relief. Everything that we are doing, as much as you would like to think that everything is decided on substance and that it's, what's in the best interest of the state, we have to take into account politics. And we say here in the office and down at the Capitol, the key is 33. And that means we need to have 33 senators voting for whichever package or packages that there are to deliver meaningful property tax relief. The reason it's 33 is a simple majority of 49 senators, 25, can advance a bill. However, something as of the magnitude of a restructuring our tax structure, our tax system in the state to bring a better balance between sales income and property taxes and how we fund schools. It's going to require 33 votes to cease a filibuster. It takes 30 votes to override a governor's veto, but the threshold is higher to end a filibuster. So the key is 33. In the big picture, that's what we would like you to do, is to help us with your testimony, is to, one, definitely make sure that 1022 dies, but then also help paint the picture for the senators. While we're on the issue of hearings, there's a couple others that I want to bring to your attention. We only have 2 weeks left of committee hearings, roughly through the end of the month. But next Tuesday, there is a bill, LB 1113 by Senator Walz, and this has to do with leasing of dark fiber, which is a huge issue in whether or not public utilities, our public power state could be involved in the business of delivering broadband via dark fiber or leasing that fiber. There's in the Revenue Committee on Friday the 23rd, LB 910, Senator Bowles has a property tax circuit breaker, which is a one-time election to reduce your property taxes that you pay 1 year. There's a couple ag land valuation bills that same day in the Revenue Committee. Again, that's Friday the 23rd. And not that Senator Shoemaker is done with just LB 1022. He has a couple bills that will be in Revenue Committee the following week. On Tuesday, the 27th, one sunsets certain tax incentive programs, such as the Nebraska Advantage program. That's a component of some of the bills, especially Senator Breezy's Bill 1084, that helps pay for a certain portion of the property tax relief we're seeking. And then Senator Shoemaker has LB 1021, which would eliminate our sales tax exemption, or ag sales tax exemption for repairs and equipment. So those are a couple that are in that last week. And so that's a long answer to what we want our members to be doing with committee hearings, not only on 1022 next Wednesday, but a few other bills.
Okay. Another question. This one is actually more for Jordan, but we'll see if anybody else knows this as well. But what is Farm Bureau doing about the tax law concerning selling grain to co-ops?
Sure. Well, I know Jordan's not in here, and he could probably give you a more comprehensive answer, but I know the American Farm Bureau is obviously paying close attention to the compromise being worked out. I know that it's a priority for a lot of folks to get it quote unquote fixed. I know some people wouldn't consider undoing it a fix, but a lot of folks would. There's an opportunity, I think, moving forward with what Jordan talked about in the Farm Bill to maybe address some of those things. Reopening the tax bill isn't probably an option, but it's definitely a priority. And just so everyone knows, I think the American Farm Bureau is watching, even though we're not directly engaged.
Thank you, Ansley. Are there any more questions?
I'm not seeing any other here, but yeah. I have one other thing. Well, we got people on the line. We've had quite a few counties come in to participate in the County Farm Bureau Day at the Capitol, and that has been a tremendous success. And if your county has not, or if you would like to come down to Lincoln, Bruce mentioned for testifying, but if you would just like to come down and visit with your senator, please get a hold of me, and we will, if you have 3 or 4 that want to come down, but even if you're an individual, I can let you join another county farm bureau that's coming in. We have several coming up in the next couple of weeks ahead, so I would invite you to be a part of that. So that helps us out a lot when we're working with senators down there as well.
Do you have anything else?
I don't have any other questions.
Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Certainly, again, appreciate your time being on. And if you think of any questions pertaining to these subjects or anything else that we can help you with, be sure to know either by calling anyone at GRD or calling myself. We certainly want to help you out in any way that we can. And so I think we'll go ahead and call an end to this. Is there a plan for another webinar on, or tax, or legislative update?
Yes,
Bruce?
we intend to make this a regular weekly thing, but we haven't been able to identify the day it would be, but we are going to get that done shortly. So we will provide a weekly update as to how things are playing out both federally and at the state level.
Okay, well, that sounds great, and certainly pass the word and watch your email, watch your text, and make sure that we'll make sure that you have all the information that you need to be part of the next webinar. So again, thank you and have a great day.